Well, welcome to the virtual lobby here at Grace Church. It is so good to be with you guys as we get ready for our weekend service. So, can't wait to hang out a little bit with you guys and see how you're doing. Talk a little bit about how the week has went, see what's coming up, and also continue to see how God can move us together as the church to follow after Jesus, to continue to build our relationship with Him, and see how God wants to use us. So, I was actually just talking with somebody who has had a lot of tragedy in their life in the last couple of weeks. Just they've lost a family member and a coworker, and they have another family member that's very sick. I've actually none of that being COVID related, but just really having a rough time. And yet, even in the midst of that super dark valley, God has been incredibly faithful, and she's had some wonderful conversations and relationship moments. And so it's been really, really neat to see God work in those. But that aside, I hope you're doing well. Would love to hear from you. Introduce yourself to your service host. Let them know that you're there. Give him your name. Maybe there's something that you need prayer for. You can send it right there in the chat, or you can send them a direct message and let them know what's going on. We'd love to get our leadership engaged with you, praying with you in any way that we possibly can. So this week was a really fun week. I had a lot of unique things happen kind of in my life. And so one of those things was our Mixed Messages podcast, which many of you might be aware of. If you're not, I would highly recommend checking that out. It's a way for us to talk about different things that are happening in our culture all around us. And through that, we can kind of engage, how do we follow God through this? How do we do and be the people that He's called us to be? It's been really fun to dive into it. Well, this was the very first week that we had a guest in for the podcast. So usually it's me hosting and Pastor Jeff, and we dialogue back and forth. But this week, Pastor Jeff is been doing a lot of senior pastor things with other campuses. And so we actually had pastor coach or coach pastor Kemp Boyd, who is the executive director of Love Akron, come in and talk to us about making history today, but really also through the context of Black History Month and what does that look like. So just a fascinating conversation, definitely worth a listen. Take a look at that when you get a chance. And so that's Mixed Messages. You can find it on our website or our social media. You can watch it on YouTube. You can also discover it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, really wherever you would happen to browse or listen to podcasts. You can find it there, Mixed Messages with Jeff Bogue. So take a look at that. This weekend, this week, I also helped a friend move a piano, and I got to tell you, this was quite an adventure. So my friend calls me up and my brother, and it's good to see you, man. Good to see you up and at 'em. We called my brother. What's up, dude? And so we called my brother, and he says, "Hey, I got this piano that needs moved, and would you guys be willing to come help?" And, of course, we would love to help and be involved in that. And he was going to hire a moving company, but then he knew about us brothers, apparently. But so we go over, and this piano's in the basement, of course, and it's not even a straight shot staircase. So my brother and I are kind of like scratching our heads. How are we going to do this? How is it even going to be possible? How do they even get it downstairs? Upright piano. Well, because of the nature of the staircase and it having a turn in the middle of it, this was only going to be a two-person job. There was no way around that. There was no way for it to be anything more, no more other people involved in it. And so we start trying to figure it out. Thankfully, my brother brought these like harness things where you like put it over your head and shoulders, and then there's a strap that goes down from your torso, then like under the piano, all the way over to where he's at, and then we can kind of like lift it with our legs instead of just trying to grab it with our arms. And we had to get it up to the landing and then actually stand it on its end, turn it, and then get it back up the rest of the stairs as well. This is one of the hardest things I've done in a long time, if I'm being totally honest. I looked it up. This piano, I looked at the brand and everything. It was 460 pounds or something like that. It was insane. I haven't done anything like that, maybe ever, but definitely in a long, long time. But so, yeah, that was an interesting part of my week. Hopefully you didn't have to move any pianos this week. And if you need your piano moved, call someone else. No. So, but yeah, it was a really interesting go at it. Last weekend, I had the privilege of opening up the series that we're in right now called God, Me, and My Inadequacies. We got, where's she at? There she is, our children's ministry director. She is putting her arms in the air, doing the slow motion back there. Everybody say hi to Miss Christy. So good to see her. But we had I got to open up this series, and it was so good talking about the different narratives that we struggle with, or that just really kind of script right through our heads as we navigate life. And then we talked about especially these negative ones, like how do we see those rewritten? How do we see those things get interrupted? And so it's a fun conversation. I also mentioned that I have this hole in my ceiling really since last summer. We had a toilet valve leak and all this kind of stuff, leaked through the ceiling. Ceiling tiles came down. Short version is I had to replace the whole ceiling. Finally got moving on that project this weekend. So the wood is purchased. Some of the wood is now primed and painted. We'll be moving right along to finally replacing this ceiling. So hopefully that'll really come together here pretty soon. I'll put some pictures on my social media. Right now, if you check out my Instagram, my personal Instagram or Facebook stories, you'll see a couple of quick snapshots of where the project is at so far. But yeah, we're moving there. Excuse me. As I mentioned, I almost swallowed my gum there. That was dangerous. But as I mentioned last week, I feel like I know just enough to get myself in trouble, but not nearly enough to just jump on it and pounce on that project. And so it's a big deal. But I called my dad, got some different pointers, and I think we'll be well on our way here, hopefully pretty soon. My wife was teasing. She's like, you should also talk to the church about painting cabinets, because I did have a few wonderful and generous people reach out and say they'd love to come over and help if I ask. And so who knows, I may run into some issues, and maybe I need to have those people come over and help me out. We'll see. But so far, so good. So, hey guys, how we doing? Good to see you. What's up, brother? So it's been, like I said, it's been a really, really good week. And I want to kind of circle back around to the narratives and stuff that we've been talking about in this series now. I just want to encourage you one more time to take advantage of the kind of calling this out and spend the time maybe writing some things down, jotting some things down on your phone. These are the scripts that tend to plague me. These are the things that get in my way. These are the things that seem to put me on autopilot, and really start to go to God about those, and really start to go to him and discover what he has kind of for you to rewrite those things, the ways that you can be focusing on who he is or who he's called you to be, to help kind of change that narrative in our minds. I always loved Romans 12, verse 1 and 2. It says, we need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And so through all of this, God wants to continue to renew our minds and help us with those things. So yeah, let's keep that up. Let's keep looking at that. Now, if you've been watching these virtual lobbies here for a while, or if you know me, you might know or remember that I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like my Star Wars. I like my Marvel and all that kind of stuff. And I got to be honest, I'm like chomping at the bit to catch up on WandaVision. So if you know what I'm talking about, right? It's the Disney Plus show that released about a month and a half ago. And I'm only about 4 episodes in, so I got 2 to catch up on, and I can't wait to do it. So I'm just nerding out there, and I'm just letting you know. So maybe that's not a big deal. I'm sure and confident it's not a big deal, but I do love some of that fanfare type stuff, and it's super, super good. Well, as we're hanging out here in our virtual church lobby, this would be a good chance to remind you and encourage you to make sure that as you're watching digitally, that you look for ways to connect and be a part of what God is doing at the church. And so it's not because it's Grace Church. It's not because it's some organization that wants to be connected to more and more people. It's because we are passionate about making sure that people can find healthy and vibrant relationships so that they can be encouraged to grow in their relationship with God, to live out the life that He's called us to, and truly to make an impact in others. That as we find people in our life, whether they're those that we already think about and are kind of in our natural pathway of life all the time, or maybe they're people that we haven't even been introduced to yet, folks that are in our communities or even around the world, that God wants to use us to help them understand and know the hope of Christ. Like, it would just be so awesome if we could help connect those dots for you, show you different ways to study and be engaged in Scripture, different relationships to be connected with and grow, and really dive into how we can be a part of what God is doing. And that kind of takes our faith, like a little sapling, and it just turns it into this tree when we're finally connected to the vibrancy of His people and what He's calling us to together. It's absolutely awesome and fantastic. And so we want to help you do that. I need that, right? Like, I'm in a life group and it's so wonderfully helpful. I serve in different ways. I am always connecting with people about how to grow in my faith. And it's the only thing that makes the health that's in my life, relationally, personally, spiritually, even emotionally, it's what makes it possible. It's the foundation to everything. So if we can help you do that, right? That's why we're in this journey and this struggle together. We would love to do that. Make sure you reach out to your host and allow his leaders and stuff like that. What's up, Eric? How you doing, buddy? Good to see you. And like, allow him to do that work in your life and continue to call you forward towards Him. So we're under a minute now. We're going to be jumping into the room with those of us that are here in the building. It's so good to be the church together, whether sitting where you are or those that have been able to find a spot here in the building. So can't wait to worship together. Pastor Todd is going to be taking us a little bit farther in this series. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait to hear from him. And we're going to wrap back up here in about an hour or so as the service ends. So let's hang out together. Let's worship. We'll catch you guys in a little bit.
Hey everybody, I want to welcome you here. If you're joining us online or here in person, welcome. It's going to be a great weekend. I'm super excited about what God's doing here at our church. I'm really excited about what Jesus can do and is doing. So my name is Brad. I'm one of the pastors here. I just have the privilege of just being able to be with us all tonight, and it's going to be an awesome service. Thanks so much for coming. If you're a guest tonight, I really want to welcome you. Or maybe it's your first time watching online or really your first time in this room. I know it's always a hard thing to go to a new place. You might feel a little awkward at times and stuff, but we just want to let you know we are so glad that you're here. We're thankful that you're here. And a couple things for you is one of them, I'll tell you about this later on too. We have a free gift for you. Make sure when you leave tonight, on your way out by the one door, there's some brown bags out there that say free gift. Grab one of those. You'll find out a little bit about our church. There's just a couple little things in there for you. Just a little token, kind of our way of saying, we know it's hard. You did it. Thanks so much for being here. So another thing, too, is I want to let you know we have an app. So if you have a phone, you want to download an app, you can go to our app store, just search Grace Ohio. And when you download your app, in any app store, you can download it. When you download our app, just click on the Bath campus because we have a bunch of different campuses. And then when you get in there, click on the weekend experience. And I think that's really a great way for you to kind of navigate what happens during this next hour or so. It's a great way to see if you have kids, ways that you can get them involved. If you have teenagers, if you are a teenager, ways for you to get involved. There's things on there for college students, ways that you can find out about serving, find ways to get more connected. There's also on there ways you can follow along with the sermon. Whenever you're going through that, just spend some time. You can track along with the Bible passages in there. Maybe tonight you hear a song you like. It's like, I want to listen to that song on the way home. You can find out all that information, those songs and everything on there. So make sure you check that out. Another thing that's on there too, now this isn't for our guests, okay, but just for everybody else, if you consider Grace Church your home, I urge you to look at the giving part. Thanks so much for those of you who have been giving. Continue to see what God has been doing, and God has been using your resources to change people's lives. And God has given us so much as people. it's great that we can give some of it back to him, and he wants to do that. So there's ways in which you can do that. You can text to give, which is right up here on the screen, or on the app. You can just give on the giving thing right in there. So there's lots of ways for you to participate like that. But there's another thing on there called the connection card, that tab that's on there. Really, that's your way of just kind of letting us know if there's something that you would need, or if it's an immediate need, make sure you stop us out there in the lobby. But if you have something to say, hey, I'd like to talk to somebody about something, or I have this prayer request, we want to be more than just a 1 hour a week experience. We want to be a family, where we take care and care for one another. We're not perfect, but we know Jesus is, and we all want to run together after him. So if there's ways in which you could pray for you or pray with you, we love to do that. We pray for all those prayer requests that come through. You can send them right through there on the app as well. Or maybe you hear something, that's during the message later or during one of the songs. You're thinking, man, I need to talk to somebody about something I heard. Just do it right through there. Or there's ways you want to get connected. That's always a good first step too. So I would encourage you to check that out. So a lot of good things are happening. It's going to be a great service. But before we get too far into this, here at Grace Church, one of our key values and one of my favorite ones is that we are passionate about reaching kids and students. And God uses our church in a lot of different ways to do that. But we found one thing with sports. We love using the vehicle of sports to not only reach our students and kids, but to get out into the community, make connections there. So we've had some incredible experiences happening there with Game Day. And so Pastor Donnie on his next video is going to give you an update about exactly what God is doing over there. So check this out.
Hey guys, Pastor Donnie here, wanting to give you an update on how our Game Day Basketball and Cheerleading League is going. If I could sum things up in one word, I would say encouraging. It has been so encouraging to see the family members and child athletes and volunteers who have all come together to help Game Day be a huge success. And so I want to let you know that for the 7th year in a row, we have once again grown. We've gone from 18 teams our very first year, and now in our 7th season, we are up to 72 teams in basketball and cheerleading. That represents 550 child athletes, 200 volunteers, and about 2,300 spectators who are showing up each and every week. And this is the cool thing. This year, for the first time ever, about 1,300 of those spectators are showing up through Zoom. And so what's really cool about that is that there are actually 35 different states that are represented and 12 countries that are represented through the Game Day Zoom. And so literally, for the first time ever, Game Day is reaching people all across the world. And it's so encouraging to see that community impact once again happening in unique and different ways. Probably the most exciting thing that we've done this year, though, is our family devotion intentionality. And so Ryan Miller, our program manager, is going to talk a little bit about 100 indescribable days of Game Day.
So for December, we had over 300 kids engage in devotion readings every day, all 31 days, and many of them are continuing on through January, February, and March. They can't wait to continue getting the devotions. We were really excited on how engaged not only the children were, but also their families. We got a lot of positive feedback on how the kids use this and the families use this. It's a great way to spend just a little bit of time in devotions, and they can use that moving forward to continue getting closer to God as a family. We had one child who was so excited he couldn't wait to share this with his family at Christmas dinner and shared all the fun facts he's learned. We had one family that was really excited and really loved the book and how it engaged their child, and they used that as a Christmas present to give to their nephew. Many families are continuing into January and February and are excited that they do not have to push to use devotions as something to get closer to God, but that the kids can't wait till the end of the day when they can sit down and go through the book.
So the last thing I wanted to share with you is that if you didn't know, we actually had to split up the Game Day season into 2 different sessions. And so our first session actually just concluded last week. And I am happy to let you know that because of the one-on-one conversations that each coach has with their child athlete, we know of at least 10 kids who prayed to follow Jesus for the very first time. And so thank you for praying, and I would ask you to please keep praying for those conversations and really for the entire Game Day season that will be continuing for session 2.
That's incredible what God is doing through Game Day. All those salvations, that's amazing. Give it up for those kids. Hey, everybody. Everybody, why don't you guys go ahead and stand up? We're going to kick our service by remembering who Jesus is, that no matter the season, the storm that's happening in our lives, he is always faithful. He is always the same, and he will always love us. So if you know the song, sing it out with us. Right, here we go.
Been the same. Your love for me has never changed. No. Before the dawn of time, you knew that you would save my life. And here I stand and I sing grace. If you know it, would you sing it with us? Come on. 'Cause God, you know. So, 'cause you're faithful through every season, every storm. When I fall, your love stands firm. God, I know that you are faithful. My feelings day to day. Let's put our hands together. I know your love will be the same. 'Cause in my deep steps, never thought to love you less. No, what I feel can't change your grace. What we've done, no matter what we've been, we know that Jesus always accepts us. He loves us. Your love is unchanging. My Father will never leave me. Always you're faithful. You love me beyond my feelings. Love is unchanging. My Father will never leave me. Father
across the ocean, pulled me closer. The current changed. You showed me life, a new horizon, a silver lining, a brand new day. And I'm like, oh, I can't find the words to say. And ooh, you're higher than all my ways, and Lord, it's you who opened my eyes to see and poured out your heart for me. My God, you're indescribable. Every way, search me out, and now I'm caught up in your grace. I just can't fathom it, can't make sense. Found your love's the one deserving never ends. You give me freedom that leaves me breathless. My glimpse of heaven is life with you. Now there's no fighting this gracious rhythm. I lift my hands high and praise to you. Now every time I go, I can't find the words to say. And oh, you're higher than all my ways, and Lord, it's you who opened my eyes to see and poured out your heart for me. My God, you're indescribable. Every way, search me out, and now I'm caught up in your grace. I just can't fathom it, can't make sense. About your love's the one deserving never ends. You're indescribable, oh, 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 so indescribable, oh, 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 you're indescribable, oh, 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 so indescribable, oh, oh, oh. Perfect love took my place. Only Jesus, only grace. What compares? What comes close? Where you call me, I will go. You're indescribable in every way. Search me out, and now I'm caught up in your grace. I just can't fathom it, can't make sense. Found your love's the one deserving never ends, and never ends. You're indescribable, oh, 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 so indescribable, oh, 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 you're indescribable, oh, 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 so indescribable, oh, oh, oh.
Everybody, thanks for singing with us, being with us. Y'all can have a seat.
Well, how's it going, everyone? It's good to be together. Thanks to those that are watching live online and those of you that are in the room. I'm excited to be with you. My name's Todd. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I have the absolute privilege of working with our teenagers here at the Bath campus. And it's especially fun this weekend being on stage with the band that we have because they're all former students of mine. And it's cool, but it makes me feel really old. I'm going to be straight up with you, all right? We're continuing the conversation that we started last week called God, Me, and My Inadequacies. And I just want to remind you that Pastor Jeff is actually continuing his journey around the Grace Church movement here at our different campuses. He's wearing his senior pastor hat right now. And I tell you, my time of being here on staff, I am blown away at seeing how God is working here in the Northeast Ohio area, in Carolina, as well as even in Georgia. And it's so cool. And so Pastor Jeff is making his rounds at the the different campuses, and he'll be back with us here real soon. And so Pastor Joe kicked off our conversation last week and did a great job of helping us see that each of us are writing our own narratives. And the narratives that we have within our minds are influenced by other people. They're influenced by our culture. They're influenced by what goes on inside of our heads. They're influenced even kind of by other people at times as well, and in spiritual influences as well. And so I think it's important for us to remember kind of what we think, and even what we think about ourselves is super important. And so the good news that we established last week is that we learned that God can actually rewrite our narratives, and that it leads us to understanding to the very core of who we are. That by understanding who we are and knowing that God rewrites our narratives, it's life-giving. And I think Pastor Joe said it so well last week when he said this. He said, when we spend the needed amount of time with God, the narrative of our false inadequacies is interrupted and rewritten. And so last week we learned that our narrative is changed when we grasp the idea that God is a chooser. And because of that, we are chosen. You and I are chosen by name and on purpose. And so as we continue to jump in this week, if you missed that conversation, I encourage you to go back and find it on the app or the website, and it'll help maybe even bring some clarity to this idea of our narratives a little bit. But as we continue and kind of pick up where Pastor Joe left off, I think it's important for us to recognize that each of us are carrying weight because of our narratives. What I mean by that is each of us are wrestling with areas in our life that influence the narrative one way or another. Some of those areas may be a decision, right, that we may have made in the past, where the consequences are still having an impact in who we are now. Maybe an area is a past or current relationship that we have and the struggles that come with that. Maybe it's an addiction of some sort. Maybe it's a substance abuse or a pornography addiction that we can't seem to kick. Maybe it's this need of approval in order to feel adequate by other people. Maybe it's simply our insecurities of maybe how we look or some of the physical attributes that we have. Maybe our narrative is influenced because of somebody else, and their inadequacies have impacted who we are. Either way, these influences, these inadequacies are going to have an impact on how we view ourselves. And I think the best way that we can understand this a little bit and understanding how these inadequacies are going to influence who we are, so much so that what's going to happen is that we will start to believe things that just aren't true. We will start to say things about ourselves that's just not right. And here are some of the things that we may build up in our minds. We may think or even say that there is no way that I will ever be good enough. Or maybe it's, if you knew what I've done, you would understand that there's no way that I could be forgiven. We've actually, for some of us, have cemented our thoughts to where our past is going to define who I am. And I think in some way, some shape or form, we're all in this boat. We're all in this boat where we're allowing our inadequacies to influence who we are. Well, why? I think the truth is because none of us are perfect. We're human. And I think it's in our nature where this narrative can even be rooted back to even when we were born. I'm a father of two. I have two awesome kids. I have a son who's 4. His name is Graham. And I have a daughter who is 1.5. Her name is Willow. And I love them to pieces. And I'll be honest, I'm typically pretty tired because of them at the stage of life that they are in. But I saw how this shows up a little bit in my 4-year-old. In fact, he was 2 at the time. It was the first time that I introduced Graham to the swimming pool. All right, and I remember we were visiting some family back in Pennsylvania, and they have a pool, and I remember I'm like, Graham, do you want to go swimming? And he's like, yeah, Dad, let's go. And he was super excited. And then he got to the edge of the pool because I told him, I said, all right, well, I will go in first, all right, and then you can kind of jump into my arms and I'll catch you. And he's like, all right, Dad, that sounds great. Let's go. And I remember him standing at the edge of the pool, and his toes kind of like started to curl around the edge, and he couldn't jump, right? There was something that was preventing him of jumping into my arms. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, why? Because up to this point, Graham had no reason not to trust me. Up to this point, there was nothing that would give Graham the fear of a swimming pool. What was it that was going through his mind that was preventing him from jumping in? See, what happens is that battle sometimes that we kind of put ourselves through in our mind sometimes prevent us from taking action. You know, I thought of this. I was like, if I was at the edge of this stage and I asked somebody to come up here and catch me, I quickly remembered or thought, okay, now I know what Graham was thinking of, right? I'm like, I'm gonna get dropped, all right, I know it. And so what happened is like, this gives me just this great idea. Even from birth, even from a young age, our narratives, what goes on in our minds, our insecurities, our inadequacies, over the course of our lives are going to impact who we are. And I believe it's important for us to explore through God's eyes who we are and not get bogged down on what we are creating within our own narrative, right? What we are doing. We shouldn't get caught up on that, but rather look through God's eyes and understand who we truly are. And so last week, Pastor Joe introduced us to really the first chapter of Ephesians, where Paul is starting to walk us through and giving us a good picture of who God is. And how when we understand who God is, it gives us some clarity to understand who we are. Well, there's a couple verses that we saw last week that I think set up a great, let's just say umbrella for the sake of our conversation, kind of a heartbeat of where we're going in this series. And so Paul shares his heart and his prayer to the Ephesians in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18 and 19. Here's what Paul says. He says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. I love what Paul is sharing here because he's wanting us to grasp something. He's wanting us to know. He wants us to be enlightened about the hope that can be found. And when we understand and start to know the heart of God, Paul refers to it as this glorious inheritance. And so last week we discovered that God is a chooser. He is a chooser, which means you and I, we are chosen. And so I want to pick up where we left off here, a couple verses earlier than these, all right? We're going to start here in verse 6, and I want you to see how Paul continues, all right, to describe characteristics of who God is. Here's what it says. Ephesians 1, verse 6 says, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he lavished on us. You think about this, you want to know who God is. We understand that he is gracious. He's gracious, and he gives us his grace freely. How? He does so through the one who is his son, Jesus. And then by Jesus, we get to experience redemption and forgiveness because of what Jesus did on the cross. He shed his own blood for you and I. I love these verses because I think it gives us some purpose to why Jesus was here on earth. It allows us to see the importance of why Jesus came to free us of our past, of our inadequacies, to redeem us and to forgive us. And this was only possible because of what Jesus did on the cross. Now, for some of us, as we look at this word redeemed, to me, I think it's a little bit of a churchy word, right? Redemption. And we think about what it means to redeem something. I guess the only maybe context that I can think of is when we redeem like a coupon or something, right? We're like turning that in to get something. And so you think about that, and for the sake of our conversation, we're going to define redemption as being bought back. Being bought back. Jesus going to the cross was this incredible act of grace that God lavished upon us when we least deserved it. And by him going to the cross, by Jesus going to the cross, it serves as a transaction. It serves as a transaction for us to be able to come back to God when there's no other way. And so I don't know about you, but I actually find hope in knowing that God is not done with me yet. That he is not done with me, no matter who I am, no matter what I've done. The same is true for you as well. He wants to be near us. He wants to lavish his grace upon us. He wants us to actually experience redemption and the forgiveness of our inadequacies. But here's the deal. Our insecurities, our failures, our addictions, right? The holes that we've created because of our past, we're not worthy. We're not capable of experiencing this grace. But what these inadequacies do is it shows us time and time again this importance for a redeemer, this importance for us to experience redemption. And so for our conversation today, I want us to understand this. As Paul is laying out here in Ephesians 1 about who God is, we understand this, that Jesus is the Redeemer. And because of what happened on the cross, you and I, we are redeemed. And Paul shared that there, and in him we have redemption through his blood. See, in God's eyes, the best is yet to come. He desires us to not continue to write our own narrative. He wants to meet us where we are and begin rewriting our narrative that way. I think it's important for us to put some skin on this a little bit. And as I was preparing this message, I was thinking through an example of God's redemption. And what would be a great way to kind of exemplify this and see how God met somebody in the midst of his inadequacies. And we see this great tension, this great battle that goes on in this character's mind that ultimately led him to kind of go back and forth with God when God was asking him to do something hard. And so I couldn't help but think of a guy by the name of Moses. And so Moses, the story of Moses is found in the book of Exodus. And so encourage, if you want to, have some reading for this week, encourage you to read the first handful of chapters of the book of Exodus. But for the time that we have here today, we can't spend that much time on it. So I kind of give you a high-level backstory to who Moses is. And we'll begin to see how Moses really wrestled with his inadequacies that then led him to really wrestle with God when God was asking him to do something. So this starts even before Moses was born. The Israelites were slaves to Egypt, to Pharaoh, the ruler of the Egyptians, right? And the Israelites here are being held captive. Well, Pharaoh started to realize that the number of Israelites were growing and multiplying more and more. And so Pharaoh made this decree that any Hebrew boy that would be born would be killed at the time of birth. That was his way of all right, well, I'm going to stop the growth of the Israelites here, and so I'm going to make this decree. And so he informed all the midwives, when a baby boy is born, kill the child. If it's a girl, you can let her live. And as we see this, right, it's the time where Moses was getting ready to be born. And when Moses' mom saw him and said, man, there's something special about this child. And even the midwife let this one go. And Moses was hidden for several months while he was growing up. He was living in secrecy. But it got to the point where Moses' mom couldn't hide him any longer. You understand that the child growing up, this was getting more and more difficult. And so what she did is she decided to make a basket, place Moses in this basket, and hide him into the reeds of the river so that he wouldn't be found, because at this point, Pharaoh was like, just take the children, just throw them in the river. And so here Moses' mom hid him, and sometime later he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter came and found Moses and actually drew favor to him, felt sorry for him, felt bad for him. And so she decided to take him in as her own. Well, she realized that she was not capable of caring for Moses as well as she would like. And so she hired a Hebrew woman to come and care for Moses, to feed him, to care for him as he grew up. And this is cool how we see God's hand even in this situation, because what the woman who was hired happened to be Moses' biological mom. And so she even continued to be able to care for Moses after she ultimately placed him in the basket and put him in the river. Well, Moses grew up, he became an adult. He grew up in this like Egyptian culture because he stayed with, Pharaoh's daughter here. And so he started to experience this culture of royalty. He was in line, right, to Pharaoh. And I tell you, what happens here is pretty cool. We start to see how Moses grew up, and now as an adult, we start to get an idea of some of who he was. Because what he did is he saw how one day he looked out and he saw this Egyptian man, right, beating an Israelite. And that didn't settle well with him. It didn't settle well with him so much that he became super angry at what he saw. So much so that he went and killed the Egyptian man. Now, you have to understand, this is a big uh-oh, right? Because Moses, up to this point, was really living in some secrecy because he's an Israelite living, all right, in this Egyptian culture. And he couldn't kind of unveil who he really was. And so after this, he realized what he had done. He found out that Pharaoh was furious that this Egyptian was killed. Moses hid his body and then he ran. He went and he hid for 40 years in the desert. So as we get this backstory, as we understand really who Moses was for the first chunk of his life and what he's experienced, we found out that he was abandoned as a child, right? He was adopted into a new culture. We saw that he was living in a secret, that he was a man of anger. He was a murderer. He went, he hid, and he was on the run. So we see Moses' inadequacies here. We see that some of them were because of what he did. Others was just because of the context at which he was born into. But either way, we start to see this picture of what was going through Moses' life here. And here is a man from our point of view that seems to really be kind of neck deep in mess, where he was allowing kind of his inadequacies to kind of overflow here in his life. And what we find is that God met him even in the midst of all of this. It's cool to see how God met Moses even in the midst of everything that he just experienced. And so if you look at chapter 3 of the book of Exodus, it's page 46 here in your Bibles that are in the chairs. You can use YouVersion if you'd like, that's great. But what we see here in Exodus chapter 3 is that God reveals himself to Moses through a burning bush. Could you imagine being out in the wilderness and you see a bush on fire and that bush starts talking to you, all right? That's what Moses experienced. And so we see this, that God reveals himself to Moses through the form of a burning bush. And God goes on to explain that, here's the plan I have for you, Moses. I want you to be the one to go and free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. So catch this. We have an abandoned, easily angered murderer wanting to be used by God. God chose Moses. It wasn't because he really felt that Moses was the one that was capable of doing this. No, he chose Moses even looking past what Moses had done in his life. He didn't allow Moses' inadequacies to get into the way of what God was calling him to do. And so how did Moses respond? Hearing that God was calling him to go do, how did Moses respond? And I think this is fascinating. I want us to see how Moses was wrestling with his inadequacies, how he allowed his past to get into the way of what God was asking him to do. And so we're going to break down here some of the excuses that came to the surface because of Moses putting more power in his inadequacies rather than trusting God. And so as we look at these excuses, I want you to see even the language of how Moses responded to God and how God met him there and responded back. All right, so we're going to be in Exodus chapter 3, like I said, page 46. Here is the first excuse. It's found in verse 11. Here's what Moses says: "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He says, "Who am I?" And this first excuse reveals to us that Moses thinks that he is not adequate enough to do what God was asking him to do. And you see God's response in the very next verse. He says, "Listen, Moses, it's okay. I will be with you." Moses thought that he was not adequate enough to do this. But God shows him, "Listen, I'm going to be with you." Well, the second excuse comes out right away in the very next verse. He says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what should I tell them?" Here, this excuse is, "God, listen, I don't know enough. I don't know enough about you. What if they start to question me? What if they start to press in and I don't have the answers to their questions? God, I just simply don't know enough." And I'll be honest, I love how God responds to Moses here. If you have your own Bible, I want you to circle this next verse. I want you to highlight the response that God had for Moses. Here's what he says. He says, "I am who I am." This is what you are to say to the Israelites: "I am has sent me to you." Now, this is important. I want to park here for a second because how God responded to him is very unique for a couple of reasons. First, up until this point in Scripture, right, this is kind of the first time that God reveals to himself or reveals to someone about himself by name, right? He looks at Moses and he says, "Listen, I am who I am." And it's cool to see that he allowed Moses to get a first hand of God even revealing who he is. The second thing that's fascinating about this response is the context at which he is saying this to Moses. Because you have to remember that Moses is being asked to go lead the Israelites who have been enslaved by Egypt. And so the Israelites have been in a culture, in a context where the Egyptians would have been worshiping so many different gods. It would be God of the fill in the blank. And so here the Israelites would have just been kind of used to this worship of many gods. But God told Moses to go and tell them that I am sent you, right? The God. I am not the little g God that they are worshiping. I am over all. It's fascinating. And I think it's cool to even see how God was allowing Moses to see, listen, as you go, I'm with you. What you feel like you can't handle, I've got you. And so this response that God gave Moses, it's a good one. And we'll circle back around this one here in just a minute. But even after Moses heard this from God, the excuses didn't stop. The next excuse comes in chapter 4, verse 1. He says, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" What Moses is making the excuse now, he's like, listen, people are not going to take me seriously. I'm supposed to go in and let them know that I am has sent me. Are they really going to take me seriously? He's continuing to this process of battling with his inadequacies, battling with this doubt. And so what God does is he says, listen, right, if you look at chapter 3, verse 18, you see that God says, listen, they will listen to you. They are going to hear you, but let's not just take my word for it. Now, let me show you. And in the handful of verses there in chapter 4 in the beginning, we start to see how God met Moses where he was and showed him these 3 powerful miracles that God was going to perform through Moses. So not only is now God telling Moses, he's now giving him real examples of what he's going to do. They're going to take you seriously. But the excuses continued. This one now is starting to get, in my mind, a little petty here, all right? It's like, really, Moses, you're going to continue to press in. You're going to continue to make these excuses. And he goes on to say, here in verse 10, he's like, I've never been eloquent. I'm slow to speech and tongue. He's now going so far to say, I'm not good with my words. That's where you're going to go as God is telling you to go and do this incredible thing and showing you and telling you that he is going to be with you. But God was gracious to him here. And I find his response to Moses a little humorous because he responds with a question. He says, who gave human beings their mouth? Yeah, that's right, Moses. It was me. Hello. It was this guy. Right? And he says, is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak. I will teach you what to say. Moses is running out of excuses here. God's meeting him in each one of these voids, each one of these areas. He's showing up and saying, listen, I've got you, Moses. And finally, we're revealed to Moses' heart here. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 13, he says to God, please send someone else. This final excuse that he gives, he's like, I am not willing to go. We get this great picture of how Moses was wrestling with these inadequacies and insecurities of his life. And ultimately what he was doing is he was giving more power over to those inadequacies of his past, more than what he was giving the power to God. And because of that, he felt like he was not capable of going and doing what God was asking him to do. I love how God responded after the second excuse. What God was doing was allowing Moses to fully understand who God was by name. And what God was trying to tell Moses, he's like, listen, Moses, it's not about you or your past struggles. Right? It's about what I want to do through you. I am is sending you. And this is the strongest, purest name that I think that we find of God throughout Scripture. And he wants Moses to see that the power is found in God, in him, and not by his inadequacies. But even after that strong identifier that God gives him, he still made excuse after excuse. And this is where I feel like it gets personal to us. Because I think that this is a challenge that we face. At least I know that I have. Where our inadequacies can keep control and keep us captive from ultimately experiencing what God is asking us to do and what God wants us to do in our lives. As I think about Moses and how he was wrestling in his own narrative, as well as how he was wrestling with God, I think about my own life and I think about, I'm like, oh, I get it. I understand why Moses was making these excuses and why he was giving so much power over to those inadequacies. See, Moses was abandoned as a child. And you think, okay, but it wasn't by, his mom's choice. It was because of the context in which I get that, but he was still abandoned. And I can relate to this in my own life because when I was 12, my parents, they went through a divorce. And I remember that when I was that age in middle school there, that summer, Mom and I kind of left home and just had some space from Dad. And so a couple months went by through the course of summer. I started back up in school, and Dad reached out to my mom and said, hey, I'd like to get time with Todd. And so I'm on the phone with my dad. We're kind of working out plans. And I just remember feeling so excited to be able to finally see him after several months had gone by. And so I remember as my dad and I were making these plans, we decided that Friday, a couple days from then, that we were going to connect after school. We decided that we were going to meet in the restaurant there in my hometown and that we would catch up. And so that Friday rolls around, and I'll never forget the excitement that I had that day, looking forward, because it had been a couple months since I've even talked to him. And so I walked down to this restaurant after school, sat in the restaurant, and I waited. And I waited. And I waited. Until 4 hours went by, and he never showed. I'll tell you something, I didn't realize that phone call that I had with my dad a couple days prior to that was the last time that I was going to hear from my dad in 15 years. I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, all right, Moses, I understand. Because those 4 hours of waiting created some significant wounds in my life, brought significant pain. As I wrestled and processed why he didn't show up, the embarrassment not only in those 4 hours of waiting there, having to tell the server and anybody that walked by, don't worry, he's coming. And then even so much so that I wrestled with how that could possibly be my fault that he didn't show up. I understand how Moses was feeling. So much so that I see why he even had to live in secret a little bit. Because I remember from that moment on thinking that I couldn't let other people in to see what was really going on behind the curtain. For them to see the pain that I was experiencing because of my dad. Thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, every year that goes by, the insecurities that I continue to wrestle with, I couldn't let other people in to even see the pain of my family and how my family was messed up. So I understand, Moses, how you had to live in secrecy a little bit. And then for God to still ask Moses to use him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And to think about how God asked me to lead other people. It's like, wait, God, are you sure? Me? How am I supposed to lead other people when I can't lead myself right now? See, understanding that God is a redeemer was a foreign concept to me. I wrestled with this growing up. I struggled with this. This idea that God is even a heavenly father, it didn't make sense to me because I didn't have this example here on earth. I had an incredible godly mother. She was fantastic. I'm grateful that God blessed me with her as my mom. But she couldn't provide an example for me that a father can for his son. And so what happened is, as a result of this, I had to take matters into my own hands. I had to begin writing this narrative on my own. And when I did this, what happened was I thought to myself, if I just work harder, I'll be able to get by on my own. If I just work harder, I'll get the approval of other people. If I just work harder to hide the past, if I just work harder to show others that I've got my life all together. That's the narrative that I wrote because of the 4 hours of waiting for my dad. I gave too much power to my inadequacies over God in my life. I was too focused on the I cannot statements that were up here. And I didn't give the power over to the true I am. You see, just like God revealed himself to Moses through that burning bush, and just as he shared who he was, the great I am, Jesus actually reveals that same exact power to you and I because of what happened on the cross. You see, God lavished his grace upon Moses time and time again by meeting Moses in each one of the voids that he was creating. And Jesus does the same for me. He does the same for you by redeeming us and forgiving us of our inadequacies. See, God continued to be with Moses. He continued to journey with him. He continued to meet him where he was, so much so that we actually see, much later in Moses' life, that he still used Moses to be the one to lead the Israelites out of slavery. And it wasn't by Moses' power. It was by the great I am. God met me in my journey. All along the way, he provided example after example for me to see who he was and trust that he was with me at all times. I remember wrestling in my mind that I was not good enough. There is no possible way that I could ever be in ministry. There's no possible way that I could ever be a father or a husband because I didn't have that example set for me. I was putting too much power in those inadequacies. Because what God did is he reminded me of who he was. He reminded me time and time again that he was with me. And he showed me his redemption, the redeeming power. He bought me back with this idea. Through Jesus and through other people at each chapter of my life. I couldn't see it while I was in the midst of it, but looking back, I see that God had given me somebody all along the way that pointed me back to him. And so my friends, as we wrestle with this, my desire for us is that our inadequacies, to understand that they have no power over us. This power is found in Jesus, understanding that Jesus, what he did on the cross, redeems us. Jesus is the Redeemer. We are redeemed. There is no story, there is no past that cannot and will not be redeemed by him. I think this is an incredible example of redemption by what Christ did on the cross. And even what Paul talked about in Ephesians 1, 18 and 19, that there's this hope. There's this hope that can be found in those who believe. Believing that Jesus went to the cross for you. Jesus is the Redeemer. You are redeemed. This is some big stuff to process, big stuff to think through and to wrestle with. And so I'm going to invite the band to come out, and as they get settled in, I want to provide us some space to really process and download what it means to understand that Jesus is the Redeemer and that you and I, we're redeemed because of what he did on the cross. And so here's the first question that I want you to think through. It's this: what inadequacies are you giving more power to than Jesus? What are the inadequacies in your life that you are giving more power to than Jesus? Maybe it's past relationship struggles or current ones. Maybe it's this need for approval or just your insecurities. What is it that you are giving more power to than Jesus? The second question is this: have you ever surrendered your inadequacies over to him? Have you ever given them over to Jesus? He is the Redeemer. Do you believe that? God's desire is to draw near to us and for us to experience freedom from our past. And so have you ever surrendered those inadequacies over to him? And lastly, it's this: what steps do you need to take right now? Not tomorrow, not next week, right now, to take the power away from those inadequacies. For some of you, it might mean to just start talking to someone, to bring somebody else in to the mess of our lives. I can't tell you how helpful that was for me. And so if there is anything that we can do, if there is a pastor that could come alongside of you, or if you see even somebody up here that's on the stage with the band, or even somebody that welcomed you as you walked in the door, encourage you, stop someone and begin talking. Maybe it's that we need to draw near to God. Maybe drawing near to him through prayer or even reading of his word to understand who he is, that points us to a better understanding of who we are. Maybe that's the step where you just draw near to him. And maybe for some of us, it's us understanding that Jesus went to the cross for us for the very first time and beginning a relationship with him, knowing that what he did on the cross was for all of us, for you, no matter your past. He did that for us. Maybe you've surrendered your life to Jesus, but you're still holding on to those inadequacies. You haven't been able to let go. I encourage you to take this time think through these questions, think through where you're at personally when it comes to understanding the idea that Jesus is the Redeemer. If you're watching online, there's a host that would be willing to meet you where you are. For all of us, there's a connection card if you would rather fill that out. But encourage you, what are you going to do now to understand this truth? Jesus, thank you. Thank you for meeting us where we are. Thank you for loving each one of us, no matter our past. But God, thank you so much that you love us too much to leave us where we are. And so Jesus, I pray for all of us in this room that we can grasp that truth, that you are a Redeemer, that you have bought us back, that we can experience who God is, that we can experience that love that he has for us, that we can be reunited with him again one day. Lord, I pray for myself and for all of us that we would not give power anymore to where we've fallen short, to where we've struggled, whatever those inadequacies are, Lord, but we want to give that power to you. Jesus, would you be with us? Help us understand what it means to even love you more right now. We pray this in your name.
was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my soul till I made. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my soul till I made you. Alright, everybody in the room, you call my name as I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You call my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all I know. Yes, it is. The old may know Jesus when I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Paul says that because of Jesus, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. Let's sing it together. I need a rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break out the weight of your glory. I need a shelter, I was an orphan, now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, oh, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day.
Man, that's awesome. What a privilege it is to, experience Jesus when he calls us to follow him. And our job is to run away from that grave as fast as possible. That all of our inadequacies, all of our insecurities, let them all go behind us and follow after Jesus. If there's any way we can help you with that, we're just trying to figure it out ourselves, but we know Jesus is the one who changes people's lives. I'd encourage you, if you're a guest today, make sure you grab one of these free gifts on your way out. We are so glad that you're here. If there's any way we can help you get connected, we'd love to be part of that. But it's going to be a great week. Let's run after Jesus together. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Love that. If you want one of those bags. Maybe you're a guest and you just logged on for one of the first times here. You're checking out Grace Church. You want to know more about what we're all about and you want to feel connected. We would love to do that. So make sure you reach out to your service host even right now. What up? And make sure you reach out even right now to our host. They can get your information. We would love to get that to you. So as the church, we can be connected, driving each other together in our spiritual journeys, growing toward Christ, experiencing the hope and the strength and the peace that comes with connecting with him. Love what Pastor Todd said. Probably going to listen to that at least one more time this week. That's what I love podcasts for. It's going to be really, really good. But let's keep pushing each other and encouraging each other in the faith and connecting in person or digitally as much as we can with God so that we continue to grow in him. All right, guys, we will see you all throughout the week. We'll see you next weekend. Love you. See you soon.